Every challenge that I have endured, every time that I have not wanted to get out of bed, but I get up and put on clothes and put on makeup, it has been worth it. Every single day is a gift. I could have at 9 never imagined all of the amazing blessings that would have come from a diagnosis like this.
Welcome back to the Talking podcast, presented by Colitis Unfiltered. My name is Frank Tabering, and on this show, we talk about IBD. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kristin, who got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 9 in Cleveland, Ohio. So Kristin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's dive right in. Age 9, you were a child. As far as you can remember, because it's been a while, can you take me a little bit through how the symptoms first started to manifest? And also, I'm assuming, your parents noticed that, hey, something is wrong here. Let's have this checked out by medical professionals. How did it all start for you?
Yeah, so this was 1985. And again, I was 9 years old. It was a little bit after Easter, so April of 1985. And my initial symptoms were very watery diarrhea, a lot of urgency, stomach aches. I was running a fever. So, of course, my mom initially thought I had like a GI virus. And I was taken to the pediatrician's office. The pediatrician said, oh, well, maybe she has dysentery, which, traveler's diarrhea, which was laughable because I'd never really even left the city that I lived in, let alone like gone out of the country. So don't know where I would have gotten that. But they put me on some antibiotics and I didn't improve. And that led to us doing a colonoscopy about a month later. At the time in 1985, this was when Ronald Reagan was president in the United States, and he had had a colon cancer scare. So all over the nightly news, everyone was talking about if you have blood in your stool, if you have change in bowel habits, you could have colon cancer. So I remember the day that blood appeared in my stool as I was having these symptoms, and I was terrified. I thought, oh, for sure, I have cancer. And as a 9-year-old, my immediate thought was, how am I going to tell my parents that I have cancer? So I hid the fact that there was blood in my stool. And I remember the day that my mom found me in the bathroom on the toilet and I was crying. And she's like, what is wrong? What is wrong? I said, I'm bleeding. And I showed her. And she, of course, started crying too. And at that time, we didn't know what ulcerative colitis was. We didn't know what Crohn's disease was. We didn't know that those were even possibilities. So, of course, it was terrifying for our whole family. I ended up having the colonoscopy, and before I even got off of the table, the doctor had called my parents and told them, your daughter has ulcerative colitis. I was immediately admitted to the hospital. I was that sick. This had been, almost 6 weeks of this going on. I had lost so much weight. I was so anemic, very dehydrated, very malnutritioned. So I was admitted to the hospital and I was there for the next 87 days.
So obviously the world was a lot different back then. First of all, you were very young. Then there was no internet, not really any resource that you could look at, what it was that you had or find more information about the disease that you were diagnosed with. So if you remember, how did your parents approach the term ulcerative colitis with you, or the doctors? How did they explain it to you, if they really explained it to you at all?
It wasn't explained to me very well. All I knew is that my colon was sick and it was bleeding, and I wasn't allowed to eat because eating was going to make it worse. So I was on TPN in the hospital. I was told that this was something that could be forever, but I didn't have an understanding of what chronic meant. I thought that once I got out of the hospital that I was going to be better and that it would not, affect my life moving forward. My parents, again, there was no internet. So given this term ulcerative colitis, I think the doctors explained it to them as best as they could. We were given a pamphlet for something called the National Foundation for Ileitis and Colitis, which was like the precursor to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation here in the States. But other than that, we weren't really given a whole lot of resources or education. I was, like I said, in the hospital for almost 3 months, and I don't recall a lot of conversation being made about my actual diagnosis. There was a lot of talk of symptoms. There was a lot of talk of how we were treating it, which was high dose steroids, total bowel rest, TPN. But in terms of having a good understanding of the nature of ulcerative colitis being related to, an inflammatory condition, autoimmune. None of that was discussed with us in a manner that I could understand at 9, and I don't think that my parents had any clue the broadness of what ulcerative colitis or, inflammatory bowel disease as a whole, could encompass for the rest of my life.
Essentially, you were dealing with a vicious disease, with vicious symptoms, but at the same time, not getting a full, clear picture of what this meant, for your future. So, post-diagnosis, you just mentioned it. You stayed in the hospital for a long time. You talked a little bit about the treatments. Now, take us through how this progressed. The following years between 9 and basically what happened next.
So, what happened next, I was discharged from the hospital about 3 months after diagnosis. I was on very high dose oral prednisone, went home. I was in the third grade. So, I missed the remainder of my third grade year, returned to school in the fourth grade, and did so again on high dose prednisone. That was the only treatment available at that time. There was azolfidine, which was a 5-ASA medication, an aspirin derivative, and steroids. So steroids was what I was on. I was steroid dependent for quite some time. I had the big moon face. I gained almost 60 pounds. So when I went to school, of course, my appearance was very different. My classmates all wanted to know, where were you? Are you contagious? Why do you look like this? They nicknamed me Cabbage Patch Doll, which was like the popular toy at the time, which it was a small doll, but it had very large, puffy cheeks. So that was kind of traumatic as a kid. But I lived from age 9 until I was 15, just going through like yearly flares. My disease would always flare in the fall, like right when school would start. And then it would always flare in the spring when the seasons would change. And I know that I'm not the only patient who experiences that as well. When I was, how old was I? I guess I was about 14. I had a particularly bad flare of the colitis and again was placed on prednisone, high doses. I was a freshman in high school and it was a totally different beast at that time from being 9 years old and um, being very dependent on my parents and what they thought and looking to them for help and guidance to now being a teenager and wanting so desperately to fit in with friends and not be different, and not be sick and not miss out on activities and school things. So at that time, they put me on high dose prednisone and I was on it for a good 9 months. And that's when we started talking about potentially having some surgery.
Now, you mentioned absence from school was sort of one way of how this disease or living with the disease manifested in your life. Ages 9 to 15, it's quite a crucial time, right? As you move slowly into young adulthood. So again, before sort of the term surgery got tossed around, how did you as a child navigate this part, physically in one way, we talked about it, but also mentally?
As I started to understand the chronicity of what was going on, that like this was not going away, this was going to be something that I had to learn to deal with. That was because those years are so crucial to self-esteem, to autonomy, those types of things. It impacted me really greatly. I felt very different from my friends. I felt as if Even teachers and my parents' friends, everybody kind of looked at me as if I was broken, treated me with kid gloves. And, mental health, particularly in children, was not talked about at that time. I remember a time when I was in the hospital again, for those 3 months, I was on total bowel rest on TPN. I was not allowed to eat. I couldn't even have ice chips. And I became very fixated on food because to me, that was the most traumatic part of being in the hospital was that I wasn't allowed to eat anything. They had child life specialists at the hospital. I spent a lot of time in sort of what they called the child life room. There was a stove in there and I would bake. That was like a form of therapy. They helped me bake cookies and cakes and things, and the other patients got to eat them, and I did not. I would cut out pictures of food from magazines and glue them or tape them to pieces of construction paper, and they were plastered all over the walls of my hospital room. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I remember going to birthday parties, sleepovers for friends, and having to bring my own special milk. And if pizza was being served, I had to take the cheese off of it. And, those dietary changes were very traumatic as a kid because, again, you just want to fit in, missing school, never knowing if I was going to feel well enough to participate in whatever it was that was coming up for school, whether it be a field day or a field trip or something like that. Never once at that age were we offered the opportunity to meet with like a child psychologist, which I think is just a travesty. And I'm so glad that that is not the case now. But, so it was kind of me and my own coping mechanisms. And admittedly, they weren't the best. I was a very non-compliant teenager, often would not take my medicine. And I would do things like hide it in plants and told my parents I had taken it. It was kind of my form of rebellion, but I think also my way of sort of trying to punish my body because it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. It was kind of a self-destructive type thing. I didn't understand it as that at the time, but looking back and having done therapy as an adult, I very much now recognize that that was part of what was going on.
You were not old enough to understand that it's okay to be angry at your body, but then also not forget that having your body is giving you actually the opportunity to fight back, right? Or to do whatever you can physically to fight this disease. So,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. So you basically were left to,
I remember,
right. Yeah.
I was very angry, and it wasn't until I was well into early adulthood. I think I was 19 years old, and that was the first time a healthcare practitioner gave me permission to be angry about what was happening to me and what had happened. And that moment in time, I remember it like it was yesterday. It totally changed the entire trajectory of my life and my way of managing and accepting my disease. Because as a child, I was very much told, you're strong, you can do this. I became everyone else's sort of inspiration porn. Everybody would talk about, oh, she's so strong. And internally, I internalized that, and that became my mantra. I'm strong, I can do this. And because of that, I never made my emotional needs known. Never would talk to my parents about how I was feeling. Never would admit that I was scared, that I was, broken inside and didn't have even the vocabulary at that young age to really name the emotions. Just knew that inside of me was like a swirling tempest, but I kept, suppressing it because I was strong. That's what I was told. I was strong. You can do this. You have to fight.
Yeah. So a change of mindset kicking in around the age of 19, but there's a little gap here that we haven't talked about yet, right? Between ages 14 and 19. So can you take us briefly through that period? And you mentioned it before, surgery, right?
At 15, again, freshman in high school, I was in the doctor's office, and that was the first time the word surgery was mentioned. And the surgery that they were talking about was going to be a J pouch. So an internal reservoir, ileal anal pouch anastomosis, and with the caveat that I would have a diverting ostomy as that was formed and healed. And then I would wear the ostomy for about 3 months, and then they would connect the J pouch, and I would go to the bathroom normally. And I remember very much thinking, this is it. This is my answer. I'm 15. I'm on steroids. I can't live the life that I want. They're offering me a chance to be better. And I begged my parents. I said, please let me have the surgery. And my parents were very much of the mindset that they were hopeful that, at that time, there was some sort of research break, right around the corner. There was going to be a new medication that was somehow going to help me. Something was going to happen and nobody was going to have to cut on their baby girl. And I very much pushed for surgery. I just wanted to be better. And if I had to wear an ostomy or a bag, as I would call it at that time, for 3 months, I was more than willing to do that. Now, mind you, I'd never seen an ostomy. I'd never talked to anybody who had an ostomy. So when they're telling me you're going to be wearing a bag on your side, I mean, I literally pictured like a grocery bag, right here on my side, like not even on the front of my abdomen. But I was so desperate to be normal as a teenager. I was more than willing to do that. And at age 15, I went in, had a total colectomy and J pouch formation and a temporary diverting ileostomy. The moment they took that diseased colon out of there, and I was told afterwards that it was a good thing that I chose to have elective surgery, because had I not, I probably would have had emergency surgery a month or two later, because I was very close to toxic megacolon. So I immediately felt better. My body felt better. I can't even describe it to you. It just was different. Like, you don't realize how sick you are until you're not sick anymore. So what, for me, it was such a dichotomy, because up until surgery, I was very, very excited about this and very looking forward to being well and getting back to my life. And then afterwards, very sharp change in my mood and my sense of hope. So I was very, very blessed that a special nurse came into my life and really impacted the way that I started to see things, and helped me become accepting of having an ostomy, albeit temporary. That to me, that was the caveat that, well, I can learn to do anything for 3 months. And then the spring of my sophomore year of high school, started developing really bad back pain, high fevers, and nobody could really figure out what's going on. Long story short, I ended up in the hospital, and they did some exploratory surgery, discovered that the J pouch had developed a small leak at the site of the anastomosis, or where it's connected to the small bowel and the rectal area. And I had a very large abscess that had grown around my coccyx and had caused some osteomyelitis, or bone infection. So they gave me another diverting ostomy so that could all be cleaned up and cleaned out. I went home that summer on IV antibiotics, was able to finish school for that year with a tutor at home. And then by that August, everything had kind of cleared up. We went back in, reconnected the J pouch, and I did pretty well from that point on until I was a freshman in college. And then I was dealing with constant pouchitis. I had developed another leak in the pouch, and I was young. I was a teenager. I had not yet learned that this was going to be chronic, right? I think that is such a hard thing for people to understand, especially when it happens young, that like this is something you're going to have to learn to manage for the rest of your life. So at 19, in college, still very much trying to punish my body. I did not live a great lifestyle for someone who was chronically ill and had health issues to manage. So long story short, I got home on a Tuesday evening, and by that Thursday, I was in emergency surgery. and woke up, had an ostomy. My dad was there. We managed things with humor in my home. So, my first question was, do I have a bag? And he said to me, he's like, well, he's like, the good news is you have an ostomy. And I'm like, well, that's the good news? I don't understand. I said, what's the bad news? And he said, well, the bad news is the breast implants didn't take. So, at 19, that was that was funny, but I, at 19 thinking about, like, is this now going to be permanent? And that was my first question, was this for the surgeon, was it, is this going to be permanent? And he said, well, you're going to have it for a while. And I said, well, how long is a while? And he said, well, how long is a piece of string? And I thought, okay, like, I need to know. I need to have a mindset of, what's next? What do I have to worry about? So long story short, it did become permanent. And at that time, that is when someone from the medical field finally gave me permission to be angry and upset. And I remember exactly what she said to me. She said, you are very angry and you are punishing your body. She said, I want you to know it's okay for you to be angry. She said, but what you do with that anger is going to determine how you live the rest of your life. And that was the moment. There had been moments up until then. I had, as a teenager, attended a camp for kids with bowel and bladder diseases and disorders and ostomies, and I'd made friends there like myself. It was the first time I'd ever met another teenager who struggled with what I struggled with, who had chronic health issues. That was life-changing for me, but that's only once a year. So when I would come home then, I would fall back into um, destructive behaviors and being very angry at my body and not accepting and learning that this is the only body I get, and I've got to learn to treat it with kindness and take care of it.
Yeah. So you woke up around age 15 after your first surgery, feeling this sense of relief. However, that relief didn't last very long, and you never really had a chance at a regularly normal life, with your J pouch, clearly. So at that point, then around 19, when you've finally had the ostomy and you knew it was going to be permanent, was that the moment where you actually started to have a normal life, your normal life back, or to start a new life? And then has it ever since then, with your ostomy, you've been living with it this way until now, or any other sort of setbacks or challenges that you experienced?
Lots of challenges and setbacks since then. So the ostomy became permanent at 19, and that was sort of the eye-opening moment that, like, okay, this is permanent. This is going to be for the rest of my life. I, of course, had all kinds of questions about what was that life going to look like? Am I going to date? Am I going to get married? Am I going to be able to have a child? What about a career? All of those things. And one of the ways that the disease affected my life was that I didn't get to finish college right out of high school. When I came home from school that second year and had emergency surgery, it was a time where my parents were going through a pretty tumultuous divorce. And what happened was that my dad ended up dropping me from his healthcare insurance. So, as someone who was 19 in school, needed ostomy supplies every month to be able to live, was on medications, being at school, being able to afford school, and being able to navigate it without healthcare insurance was not an option. So I didn't return to college that year, but I was able to find a job at the hospital that I had worked at, or had had all of my treatment at. I was able actually to work on the very same floor with all the nurses who had taken care of me. So I worked as a nurse's aide, and that was really key to my healing as well. I think being around other young patients and helping to take care of them, sort of my way of giving back was very therapeutic and cathartic for me. And that was transformational in terms of reconfirming to me that I eventually wanted to be a nurse. And in caring for them and learning to take care of these kids as a nurse's aide, it helped me learn how to take care of myself. So I was working at the hospital. I met someone who eventually became my husband. We did eventually have a baby, even though I was told that that was not going to be possible. I did have a baby. She's 22 now. That was sort of my little miracle moment. My body that had constantly let me down and I felt like had failed me for that for that 9-month moment in time. It really kind of did what it was supposed to do. And that again, I think also was huge in me um learning to treat myself with loving kindness and to value what my body could do instead of focusing on what it hadn't been doing for years. My bowel disease at that point was in remission, and I haven't really had a flare of bowel disease since then. Now, I was re-diagnosed with Crohn's disease after I went back to the ostomy, and we did some more testing on the J pouch that was still there in my pelvis. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which explains why the J pouch did not work. So that was always kind of in the back of my mind that, okay, I've got Crohn's disease. I'm doing really well. But it's always kind of a sleeping giant in my life, never knowing if it's going to rear its ugly head. Most of my complications since then have been sort of IBD adjacent. So having the ostomy and having had so many surgeries with, the J pouches and ostomy revisions, I started to develop hernias. So I've had a couple, well, not a couple, I've had a lot of surgery to repair either ventral hernias, so along my old incisional line, or peristomal hernias around the stoma. I have had two rebuilds of my abdominal wall, so once with cadaver tissue and once with mesh, which is what I have now. So lots of complications in that terms, but not necessarily Crohn's disease directly. I do still battle the extraintestinal manifestations of inflammatory bowel disease. So over the years, I've had bouts with pyoderma gangrenosum. I've had uveitis in my eyes, lots of different skin issues, hidradenitis, all sort of directly related to inflammatory bowel disease. But miraculously, my small intestine has been good, and I've not had any actual bowel disease for close to almost 30 years.
At least.
Yeah.
At least that. You've at least been given
Yes.
that gift
At least that.
of being able to manage that, right?
Yeah.
And also managing your Crohn's,
Mm-hmm.
that came on top of the colitis diagnosis. So you really almost, to put it in a almost funny way, you did it all.
Yeah, I have. I always laugh, working where I do at the hospital. My coworkers often say to me, they're like, well, when they learn my story and know how much I've been through, they're like, well, you don't look like you've gone through any of that. And I'm like, well, good. That's good. I don't want to look like I've suffered all that trauma. But I do find it interesting and almost to me a blessing that, when I come in contact with other patients, I've experienced a lot. So I have I can speak into their journey and hopefully offer some wisdom and advice along, to help give them some comfort. And yeah. So yeah, lived through a lot, but I'm still here. And that, I remember when I reached age 40 and I had just a day where I just cried because I never thought that I would see 30 years old, or sorry, 40 years old. And I am now 3 weeks from my 50th birthday. And every single day is a gift, even with an ostomy, even with other health challenges. Every single day is a gift.
If we have someone whose IBD journey is not going very well, who might be facing surgery or is certain to face surgery, but who's very afraid of not just having a surgery, but then also living a life with an ostomy. Just very bluntly, what's your message to those people?
My message to those people is that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be in a place where you're not sure if you can accept what's going on with you or what could happen to you. But like was told to me, your mindset and what you choose to do with that anger is going to be instrumental in whether or not you recover and go on to live the life that you dream about. There is nothing that you can't do with an ostomy unless it's self-limiting, unless you tell yourself that you can't do it. It won't be easy. I won't lie to you and tell you that it will be easy, but I will tell you, find yourself a support system, meet other patients. I cannot stress enough meeting patients like yourself, whether you're going to have surgery or whether you're dealing, strictly with inflammatory bowel disease or any other kind of chronic condition. Meeting people who understand and you have that instant camaraderie is really a key, I think, to rehabilitation. And that is one of the things that I have said all along is that initially being able to meet someone who we had this immediate, there wasn't a need to explain, there wasn't a need to, there was no presupposition. We just went into the situation where we knew that we would support each other, that's what we were there for. So, find your tribe, meet some other patients, like yourself that you can, commiserate with, but also support and lift up. Giving back is huge in terms of healing. I think for me, it has been instrumental. I know for so many other patients, the ability to take something negative and turn it into a positive makes a huge difference in your mindset and how you feel when you get up every morning and decide what's my day going to look like. If I can in some way use something that is negative in my life or that I have overcome to help somebody else do the same. I think that's why we're all here, right? We're all here to lift each other up and to kind of, walk each other through this life. Disease or not disease.
I think here it's pretty safe to say if you can do it, after everything that you've went through, which is definitely, I'd say, not the norm, I think then other people can at least find the inspiration to listen to your story, to look at your story and say, okay, she's been through this, so I can at least try and manage what I'm going through as well. So that's your message to others out there struggling with IBD. To bring it full circle, I'd now be interested to know from you, and I kind of have a hunch of of what you might say, what you're going to say, but if you go back to that 9-year-old who tried to hide her symptoms from her parents, and if you could go back in time, what would you tell yourself?
You're gonna make me cry. I think about her a lot. I have thought about her over the years. And I think now is, like I said, I'm about to turn 50 and having never thought that I would make it to this age, I would just encourage her and tell her that it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. Every challenge that I have endured, every time that I have not wanted to get out of bed, but I get up and put on clothes and put on makeup, it has been worth it. Every single day is a gift. And I would tell her I'm sorry that she didn't get to have a childhood, but that later in life, people will help her work through that and that she gets to have such an amazing adulthood using her experiences to help others along their journey. Yeah, I could have at 9 never imagined all of the amazing blessings that would have come from a diagnosis like this. So I just want her to know that she is strong. You know, she is that strong girl that everybody told her she had to be, and that she goes on and she does good things. Good things come from the bad.
And frankly, that 9-year-old girl would go on to become a very resilient human being and persist as well. So with that, Kristin, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to open up and share your story. I think there's a lot of inspiration to extract from here. And again, this word resilience gets tossed around a lot these days, but I think this is definitely also truly a story of resilience and persistence. So I really do believe that people who listen to this, people who watch this, will be able to draw a lot of inspiration, and sort of dive deeper into their own, IBD miseries, and find the strength to still, continue to look for the light at the end of the tunnel, and then hopefully also find it. So
Yes.
For you, I can only tell you, I wish you the best moving forward. And thanks so much for being us here today. It's really been a pleasure, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the chance to share my story, and I hope that someone finds it impactful. And like you said, I don't want anybody to compare themselves to me or my journey. And I fully recognize, everything that you are going through, and how it impacts your life. But I want to offer that encouragement, and I hope that my story has done that.
That's it for today's episode of Talking Shit, presented by Colitis Unfiltered. I'm Frank Tabering, and if this hit home or hit your gut, do us a favor, subscribe to the show, and follow us at Colitis Unfiltered on YouTube, Substack, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and Reddit. We'll see you soon for more inspiring stories from the bathroom floor.